Margaret sat in the nursery, rocking her 3-week-old daughter in the silence of 2 a.m. The baby, Lucy, had finally stopped crying. Margaret's body ached. Her stitches still hurt. Her milk hadn't come in properly. She hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time since the birth. And her husband, David, hadn't touched his daughter once. Not once. He worked from home now. His office was right down the hall. But he never came to help. Never asked if she needed anything. Never even looked at Lucy when he passed through the room. Margaret told herself it was stress. He was building his company. He was focused. Men processed fatherhood differently. She told herself a lot of things. But tonight something felt different. David was standing in the doorway. Just standing there. Watching her. Margaret. His voice was flat. She looked up, exhausted. Is something wrong? He stepped into the room. He was holding a folder. I need you to leave. Margaret blinked. What? I need you and the baby out of the house by tomorrow. She stared at him. The words didn't make sense. David, I just had a baby. I can't. I've spoken to a lawyer, he said. His tone didn't change, like he was reading from a script. You have no legal claim to this property. It's in my name. I'm asking you to leave voluntarily. Margaret's arms tightened around Lucy. Is this a joke? No. David, I'm your wife. And I'm asking you to leave my house. There was no anger in his voice. No emotion at all. That was the part that scared her most. Where am I supposed to go? She whispered. That's not my concern. He set the folder on the dresser and walked out. Margaret sat there in the dark, holding her daughter, trying to understand what had just happened. She didn't cry. She was too tired to cry. She just sat there. And for the first time since the wedding, she wondered if she'd ever really known him at all. The next morning, David didn't speak to her. He made coffee. He answered emails. He acted like she wasn't there. Margaret packed 2 suitcases. She didn't know what to take. She kept stopping to feed Lucy, to change her, to just breathe. Her phone buzzed. A text from David. Locksmith arrives at 3 p.m. You need to be gone. Margaret stared at the message. He was changing the locks. She called her sister, Claire. No answer. She called her mother. Voicemail. She hadn't spoken to most of her friends in months. Pregnancy had been hard. David had said she needed rest. She'd stayed home. She'd let connections fade. Now she had nowhere to go. At 2:45 p.m., Margaret loaded the suitcases into her car. Lucy was strapped into the car seat, sleeping. David stood at the front door, watching. David, Margaret said. Her voice cracked. Please, just tell me why. He looked at her for a long moment. I don't love you, he said. I never did. Then he closed the door. Margaret stood there on the driveway. The house she'd lived in for 3 years. The house where she'd painted the nursery. Where she'd imagined raising her daughter. She got in the car. She drove. She didn't know where she was going. And that's when the first domino fell. Margaret checked into a budget motel off the highway. The room smelled like bleach and old carpet. There was a stain on the bedspread. The air conditioner rattled. Lucy cried. Margaret changed her. Fed her. Rocked her. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and opened her phone. She needed to check their bank account. See how much money she had to survive on. She logged in. Access denied. Margaret frowned. She tried again. Access denied. Her heart started to pound. She called the bank. Yes, Mrs. Brennan. The account was closed this morning by the primary account holder. Closed? Yes, ma'am. All funds were transferred to a new account. Margaret's hands went numb. How much was in there? I can't disclose that, but... It was a joint account, Margaret said. I'm his wife. The account was solely in his name, ma'am. You were listed as an authorized user, but... Margaret hung up. She checked her credit card. Declined. She checked her other card. Declined. David had cut her off completely. She had $63 in cash. That was it. Margaret sat there in that motel room, staring at the wall, trying to process it. He hadn't just kicked her out. He'd erased her. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. Lucy was restless. She kept waking up every hour, crying. Margaret's body ached. Her mind was numb. She kept replaying David's words. I don't love you. I never did. 3 years of marriage. A pregnancy he'd said he wanted. A daughter he refused to hold. What had she missed? At 4 a.m., Margaret finally gave up on sleep. She opened her laptop and started searching. David's company was called Brennan Capital Advisory. He'd started it 2 years ago. He worked with high-net-worth clients. Investments. Wealth management. She'd never paid much attention to the details. He said it was boring. He said she didn't need to worry. She Googled the company. The website looked professional. Clean. Trustworthy. But there was something off about it. The client testimonials were generic. No last names. No photos. The address listed was a WeWork location. And the business license had only been filed 6 months ago. Not 2 years. Margaret's stomach twisted. She kept digging. At 6 a.m., her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You need to see this. A link. Margaret hesitated. Then she clicked it. It was a news article. Local business journal. Published 4 hours ago. Local wealth manager under federal investigation for wire fraud. Margaret's hands started shaking. The article didn't name David directly, but it described his company, his methods, his clients. He'd been promising guaranteed returns, taking money from retirees, moving it between accounts, and now the FBI was involved. Margaret read the whole article twice. Then she saw the last line. Federal agents froze all accounts associated with Brennan Capital Advisory early Thursday morning. Thursday. That was yesterday. David's accounts had been frozen. And hours later, he'd kicked her out. Margaret sat there in the dark motel room, holding her sleeping daughter. Everything clicked into place. David hadn't kicked her out because he stopped loving her. He'd kicked her out because he was about to lose everything. And he didn't want her name attached to it. She wasn't his wife. She was a liability. Margaret's chest tightened, not with sadness, with something colder. She opened her email, started typing. If David thought he could erase her, he was wrong. Because Margaret had something he didn't. She had the truth, and she was about to make sure everyone knew it. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She sat at the tiny motel desk, laptop open, going through every file she'd ever saved from their shared computer. David had been careful, but he hadn't been perfect. In the cloud backup, one he'd probably forgotten she had access to, Margaret found everything. Client contracts, email threads, bank statements, transfers. He'd been running a scheme. Not a full Ponzi, but close. Taking money from elderly clients, promising safe, high-yield returns. Moving their funds into his personal accounts. Paying out just enough to keep them quiet. And when the market dipped last year, he doubled down. Took more money. Made bigger promises. Now it was all collapsing. Margaret felt sick. These were real people. Retirees. People who'd trusted him. She kept reading. Then she found something else. An email thread from 8 months ago. Between David and someone named Vanessa Holt. The subject line, exit strategy. Margaret clicked it. If this goes south, we need to be clean. No paper trail to you. I'll handle the accounts. You stay offshore until it clears. Vanessa's reply. What about Margaret? David's response. She's not a problem. She doesn't ask questions. Margaret stared at the screen. Vanessa Holt. She Googled the name. A LinkedIn profile appeared. Corporate attorney. Specializing in asset protection. And in the profile photo, Vanessa was standing next to David at some charity gala. Margaret scrolled through more emails. They went back 2 years. Long before Lucy was born. Long before David had ever said he wanted a family. Margaret closed the laptop. She sat there in the silence. Lucy stirred in the bassinet, but didn't wake. Margaret had spent 3 years trying to be the wife David wanted. Quiet. Supportive. Uncomplicated. She'd believed him when he said he loved her. She'd believed him when he said they'd build a life together. But she'd never been his partner. She'd been his cover. The respectable wife. The stable home. The image of success. And now that the image didn't matter anymore, neither did she. Margaret felt something shift inside her. Not anger. Not yet. Just clarity. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, Margaret walked into the offices of the Sacramento Tribune. Lucy was strapped to her chest in a baby carrier. Margaret's hair was unwashed. Her clothes were wrinkled. She didn't care. She asked to speak to an investigative reporter. The receptionist looked skeptical. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Margaret said. "But I have documents about a federal fraud case. And if you don't let me speak to someone in the next 5 minutes, I'll take them to Channel 7 instead." The receptionist picked up the phone. 10 minutes later, Margaret was sitting across from a journalist named Sam Ortiz. He was older, tired-looking, skeptical. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, "what can I do for you?" Margaret set a folder on the desk. "My husband is David Brennan. He runs Brennan Capital Advisory. And he's been defrauding retirees for 2 years." Sam opened the folder. His expression changed. "Where did you get this?" "Our shared cloud account," Margaret said. "He forgot I had access." Sam flipped through the documents. Client names, dollar amounts, email chains. "This is substantial." "There's more," Margaret said. She pulled out her phone, showed him the email thread with Vanessa Holt. "He's been planning an exit strategy with his attorney. Offshore accounts. Asset protection. He's trying to disappear." Sam looked up at her. "And you're bringing this to me, why?" Margaret met his eyes. "Because he kicked me and my newborn daughter out of our home 3 days ago. Because he drained our accounts and left me with nothing. Because he used me as a prop, and the moment I wasn't useful anymore, he erased me." Her voice didn't shake. "And because the people he stole from deserve to know the truth." Sam studied her for a long moment. "You realize this will be public. Your name, your marriage, everything." "I know. And you're okay with that?" Margaret looked down at Lucy, sleeping against her chest. "I'm not doing this for me," she said quietly. "I'm doing it because it's right." Sam nodded slowly. "Give me 2 days," he said. "I'll make some calls. Verify what I can. Then we'll run it." Margaret stood. "Thank you." She turned to leave. "Mrs. Brennan?" She looked back. "For what it's worth," Sam said, "I think you're very brave." Margaret didn't feel brave. She felt hollow. But she nodded and walked out. The article ran on a Saturday morning. Local wealth manager accused of defrauding dozens of retirees. Wife exposes documents. It was front page. Above the fold. By noon, it had been picked up by 3 TV stations. By evening, it was trending online. Margaret's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Reporters. Lawyers. Strangers. She turned it off. She was still staying at the motel. She'd moved to a slightly cheaper one the day before. Lucy was crying more now. Colic, maybe. Or stress. Margaret fed her. Rocked her. Tried to stay calm. But inside, she felt like she was falling apart. She'd done the right thing. She knew that. But it didn't make her feel better. It didn't bring back the life she thought she had. It didn't undo the fact that she'd been used. She sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the wall. Her phone buzzed again, even though it was off. No, wait. That was the room phone. Margaret picked it up. "Hello? Mrs. Brennan?" A woman's voice. Professional. Calm. "Yes. My name is Linda Yao. I'm an attorney with the Federal Trade Commission. I've been working on the Brennan Capital case." Margaret's heart sank. "Am I in trouble?" "No," Linda said quickly. "Not at all. In fact, I'm calling because you may have just saved this investigation." Margaret blinked. "What?" "The documents you provided to the Tribune. We've been trying to get those for months. Your husband's attorney has been blocking us at every turn. But now that they're public, we have grounds to move forward." Margaret didn't know what to say. "Mrs. Brennan, I'd like to meet with you. Officially. We'll need your testimony. And I want to make sure you're protected." "Protected from what?" Linda hesitated. "Your husband is facing serious charges. And people like him don't go down quietly." Margaret felt a chill. "When can we meet?" she asked. 3 days later, Margaret sat in a federal building downtown. Linda Yao was younger than she sounded on the phone. Sharp. Direct. Kind. "Let me be clear," Linda said. "You're not under investigation. You're a witness. And from everything we've seen, you had no knowledge of your husband's activities. I didn't, Margaret said. I swear. I believe you. Linda leaned forward. But here's what you need to understand. Your husband moved a lot of money, and some of it passed through accounts with your name on them. Margaret's stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means that legally, you could be considered complicit, unless we can prove you weren't involved. Which we can. But it also means your husband might try to use you as a scapegoat. He already did, Margaret said quietly. That's why he kicked me out. Linda nodded. We're going to protect you. But I need you to be completely honest with me. About everything. Margaret told her everything. The eviction. The frozen accounts. The emails. The timeline. Linda took notes. Asked questions. Listened. When Margaret finished, Linda sat back. You did the right thing, she said. And I'm going to make sure that's on the record. What happens now? Now we build the case. Your husband will be arrested within the week. He'll likely try to flee, but we've already flagged his passport. And his attorney, Vanessa Holt, she's under investigation too. Margaret felt something loosen in her chest. And me? Linda looked at her. You're going to be okay. It won't feel like it for a while. But you will be. Margaret nodded. She wanted to believe that. David was arrested on a Wednesday. Margaret saw it on the news. He was walking out of the WeWork office in handcuffs. His face was blank. No expression. The reporter's voice was sharp. David Brennan, 38, has been charged with wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Federal prosecutors say he defrauded over 40 clients out of more than $6 million. Margaret turned off the TV. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel anything. Just tired. 2 weeks later, Margaret sat in a small apartment her sister had helped her find. It wasn't much. 1 bedroom. Old carpet. But it was clean. And it was hers. Lucy was asleep in a second-hand crib by the window. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of mail. Most of it was legal documents. Court dates. Depositions. Requests for testimony. But one envelope was different. It was handwritten. No return address. Margaret opened it carefully. Inside was a single piece of paper. Mrs. Brennan, I don't know if you'll remember me. My name is Dorothy Callahan. I was one of your husband's clients. I'm 74 years old. I gave him my entire retirement savings. $340,000. Everything I had. When I found out what he'd done, I thought my life was over. But then I read your story. And I realized something. You lost everything too. And you still told the truth. I don't know if I'll ever get my money back. But I wanted you to know that what you did mattered. You didn't have to speak up. But you did. And that gave me hope. Thank you. Dorothy. Margaret read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. She walked over to the crib and looked down at Lucy. Her daughter's tiny chest rose and fell. Her fingers curled in sleep. Margaret didn't know what the future looked like. She didn't know if she'd ever feel whole again. But she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let what David did define her. She was going to rebuild. Slowly. Quietly. Not for him. For herself. And for Lucy. 6 months later, Margaret sat in a federal courtroom. She was wearing a simple gray dress. Her hair was pulled back. Lucy was with Claire for the day. Margaret hadn't wanted to be here. But Linda Yao had asked her to testify. It'll help, Linda had said. The jury needs to see the human cost. So Margaret came. David sat at the defense table. He looked thinner. Older. His lawyer, a new one, not Vanessa, whispered something to him. David didn't look at Margaret. Not once. When it was her turn to testify, Margaret walked to the stand. The prosecutor was a woman named Rachel Eng. She was calm. Measured. Mrs. Brennan, Rachel said. Can you describe your marriage to the defendant? Margaret took a breath. I thought we were building a life together, she said. I thought he loved me. Did he ever discuss his business with you? No. He said I didn't need to worry about it. Did you have access to financial accounts? I thought I did. But when he kicked me out, I learned everything was in his name. I had nothing. He kicked you out? Yes. 3 weeks after I gave birth to our daughter. There was a murmur in the courtroom. Rachel continued. And why do you believe he did that? Margaret looked at David. He was staring at the table. Because his accounts had just been frozen, Margaret said. And he didn't want me connected to what was coming. Did he tell you that? No. But I found the emails. The planning. The exit strategy. He'd been preparing to disappear for months. And what did you do with that information? I gave it to a reporter. Because the people he stole from deserved the truth. Rachel nodded. No further questions. David's lawyer stood. He was older. Aggressive. Mrs. Brennan, isn't it true that you benefited from your husband's income? Yes. You lived in a nice house. Drove a nice car. Enjoyed a comfortable life. Yes. And yet you expect us to believe you had no idea where the money came from. Margaret met his eyes. I trusted my husband, she said quietly. That was my mistake. The lawyer paused. No further questions. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Margaret didn't attend most of it. She couldn't. She had Lucy. She had a part-time job now, working remotely. She was barely holding it together. But on the day of the verdict, Linda called her. You should be here, Linda said. So Margaret went. She sat in the back row. Anonymous. The jury filed in. The judge asked for the verdict. On the count of wire fraud, guilty. On the count of money laundering, guilty. On the count of conspiracy, guilty. David didn't react. He just sat there. The judge set a sentencing date for 2 months later. Margaret stood and walked out before anyone could stop her. Margaret didn't go to the sentencing hearing. She read about it online. 15 years in federal prison. Restitution ordered. Asset forfeiture. The whole thing. David's face in the thumbnail looked hollow. Margaret closed her laptop. She didn't feel relief. She didn't feel closure. She just felt tired. That night, Margaret sat in her apartment. Lucy was 8 months old now. Crawling. Babbling. Smiling at everything. Margaret watched her daughter chase a stuffed rabbit across the floor. And for the first time in months, she felt something other than exhaustion. She felt present. Not happy. Not yet. But here. A week later, Margaret received another letter. This one was from the Federal Victims Fund. Her portion of the restitution. $43,000. It wasn't much. Nowhere near what she'd lost in trust in time in herself. But it was something. Margaret deposited the check. She paid off her debts. Bought a better car seat. Put the rest in savings for Lucy. Then she sat down and wrote a letter of her own. Dear Dorothy, thank you for your letter. It meant more to me than you'll ever know. I don't know if I'm brave. Most days I don't feel like I am. But I'm still here. And so are you. And maybe that's enough. Margaret. She sent it. And she meant every word. Margaret stood in the doorway of her new apartment. It was small. But it had 2 bedrooms. And a park across the street. Lucy, now 2.5, was running in circles, laughing. Margaret smiled. She had a full-time job now. Benefits. Stability. She'd reconnected with old friends. Started therapy. Learned to ask for help. She still thought about David sometimes. Not with anger. Not anymore. Just distance. He'd tried to erase her. But she was still here. One afternoon, Margaret's phone buzzed. A message from Sam Ortiz, the reporter. Thought you'd want to see this. A link to an article. Vanessa Holt sentenced to 7 years in asset concealment case. Margaret read it. Vanessa had been convicted. Disbarred. Sentenced. The article mentioned David. Mentioned the scheme. And at the very end, one line. The case was cracked open after documents were provided by David Brennan's ex-wife, Margaret Brennan, who has since rebuilt her life with her daughter. Margaret stared at the screen. Ex-wife. She hadn't thought of herself that way yet. But it was true. The divorce had finalized 6 months ago. She was no longer Margaret Brennan, the wife of a criminal. She was just Margaret. And that was enough. That night, Margaret put Lucy to bed. She read her a story, kissed her forehead, turned out the light. Then she sat on the couch in the quiet apartment. No TV. No phone. Just silence. And for the first time in 3 years, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt since before the eviction. Peace. Not because everything was fixed. Not because the pain was gone. But because she'd survived it. And she'd done it on her own terms. Margaret stood and walked to the window. The city stretched out below her. Lights flickering. Lives unfolding. Somewhere out there, David was in a cell. Somewhere out there, people were still picking up the pieces of what he'd broken. But Margaret wasn't one of them anymore. She'd been erased. Forgotten. Discarded. And she'd come back. Not louder. Not angrier. Just present. And that was the most powerful thing of all. Margaret turned away from the window. She didn't know what tomorrow would look like. But tonight she was here. And that was enough. If someone tried to erase you, would you fight to be remembered? Or would you fight to remember yourself? Comment below. The end.